Hello. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning, wherever you are. I am here with Freedom Over Fascism, and today I am going to be talking to William Finnegan, who is the author of the Substacks Borderless Living and the Long Memo. Uh, and William is a political risk analyst and a former government advisor and an author. And he's focused on institutional breakdown, democratic erosion, and the real world consequences of power operating outside legal frameworks. Now, we scheduled this 2 months ago.
Yep. And nothing's happened since.
And nothing's happened since. I mean, it has been, at least a century since 2 months ago. But one of the the beauties of Substack is that sometimes the stars align and timing is everything. So I wonder if you would first introduce yourself. And for those of you on the live, I have not yet managed to open us up. So it's going to take me a bit to see the chat. I know I mess this up all the time, and I'm sorry, you guys are going to have to bear with me. If you could, William, introduce yourself and tell us why talking to you is super important at this moment, because it's super important at this moment.
Sure. So again, my name, William Finnegan. I write two Substacks on Substack. One's called The Long Memo, in which I explore essentially U.S. and institutional decoherence and borderless living, in which I explore how to mitigate that institutional decoherence in your life. And I think, the answer to the question of why listen to me, I am a former political scholar. Okay. Before I wound up getting Potomac fever and working for the president, I was on my way to getting a doctorate degree at GW. Okay. I've been in all the places that you could imagine. Okay. I've seen the big board in the war room. Okay. I've been to the sit room. I've given presidential briefings. I've been in the halls of power. And so what I think I'm able to do, and the reason why I think people gravitate towards my writing, is I provide a sober NSC level read on issues accessible to the public. That's why I think people pay attention to me. I'm not on vibes. I'm not on you should listen to me. I'm not, I was an operator once, so now I have an idea about everything. No, right? I talk about systems. I talk about incentives. I talk about risks, and I make risk legible. Okay, which is essentially what you do as a presidential advisor. Your job, you really have a couple of key jobs. The first is let's not make any obvious errors. And the second is, although I don't know what this administration's rules are, but back in the day, it was make no obvious errors and try to preserve optionality. Okay. And so to do those things, you have to be able to read the risk structure and navigate it. And so that's what I think I do with my writing.
All right. So in English, so you've been thinking and studying about this stuff for a long time. Mm-hmm. And coincidentally or not, the last couple of days have been really big. Mm-hmm. Davos, the World Economic Forum in Davos is going on right now. And yesterday, Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, and a lot of our viewers are Canadian actually, came out and said the quiet part out loud. Mm-hmm. He said the rules-based order is done, and we've got to do something different because we are no longer in the same world, and it's not a transition, it's a rupture. And then here's a couple of quotes. I will talk today about the breaking of the world order, the end of a pleasant fiction, and the beginning of a brutal reality where the geopolitics of the great powers is not subject to any constraint. Every day we are reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry. The rules-based order is fading, that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition.
Right.
So, and then today, we had Donald Trump speaking at Davos.
We did.
Doing his usual, confusing Iceland and Greenland, confusing Norway and Denmark. What do you think? I mean, obviously, it's a rupture, not a transition, but what do you think that means for how the United States and the world, particularly Canada and Europe, will work together or against each other as we go forward?
Okay. Sure. Let's back up a couple of steps so that we can, in English, talk about what happened. First, Davos is not an event for the public.
No.
This is elites talking to elites.
Right.
Okay. And so my belief, based on the various speeches, is that there was a degree of coordination between the European Union states and Canada about how to signal to each other and to elites around the world their observations and concerns. Now, in part, what shocked me was not what was said, but who got to say it, which was Mark Carney. Okay.
Right. And not Macron or somebody else.
And not Macron. Right. If I had been betting on the bingo card, my bet would have been that we're going to hear this spiel from Macron. I think they decided to make it Carney intentionally. Okay. Canada is standing in the line of fire with the United States. Canada has much greater opportunity cost and loss than the rest of Europe dealing with the United States on this issue. And so the signaling to elites was much stronger than if Macron had said it, okay, or if someone else had said it. Okay, so I think that was intentional. Okay, I think the framing with Havel in, essentially taking the signs down, no longer speaking the lie, was intentional as well. Okay, that framing is intentional as well. The importance and the reason why I wrote what I wrote yesterday of, for those of you who have been looking for the Paul Revere moment, guess what? This is it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the British are coming. All right. For those of you that think in terms of, history's got these like clean breaks that signal things. Okay, this is about as close to it as you're going to get, because you have the European countries signaling to elites that the predictability of the system that functioned for 80 years is no longer within risk tolerance. Okay, that was really what they were saying. Okay, and Carney's speech about, look, there was always this fiction and everything else. Yeah. Okay, as someone who was in behind closed door meetings, no one ever acknowledged that the United States didn't have tremendous power and couldn't get what it wanted. What made it work was everyone basically was like, most of the time we get more than zero. And so it's better to go along than it is to fight it. Okay. We benefit greater than, through cooperation than we do through obstruction. Even when the United States acts unpredictably, even when the United States acts irrationally, even when the United States acts as a great power, it still makes more sense for us to participate and cooperate than it does for us to obstruct. Okay. And so what Carney said is those laws no longer, that risk calculation is not correct anymore. And we have to stop pretending like it is. Okay. So your question, then becomes, well, okay, so what happens next? And, what kind of ruptures are there going to be and everything? I don't expect, I mean, to a certain extent, I have to caveat this by saying there's this meme I post every so often of the guy who's working at a barbecue and then a horse crashes through his fence. And the guy's like, what the hell? Every day, that's how I feel it is in this country, right? Where the amount of black swans that happen is almost getting to the point of being like, here's your regularly scheduled black swan event that you didn't expect was going to happen, but here it is. So with that in mind as a caveat, the United States is going to wind up being risk priced. That's really what was said yesterday, which is we have to stop accepting the United States as a non-risk actor. Okay. And so companies, countries, we need to start pricing the United States in reflection to its predatory risks. That is going to have tremendous impact on everyday Americans. That is going to have tremendous impact on the economy of the United States, on the political dynamics in the United States, on the national security of the United States. Okay, the administration basically believes in a doctrine that I would say, well, what would you rather, the window or the door, my fist or my foot? Okay, and that's fine, except it's super costly.
Okay. Not to mention stupid, but okay.
Not to mention it's unnecessary. It's stupid because it's unnecessary. Okay. Because again, most countries benefit through cooperation with the United States, even when the United States acts hegemonically. And so there's not a lot of incentive to compete against the United States. Okay. But we've decided, no, let's take that whole framework, throw that out the window. And now we're, coercion is our primary tool. So what's going to happen then is all these countries are going to reprice risk with respect to the United States. Now, what does that look like for average Americans? Okay. Deficits in the United States haven't mattered, and they really haven't, okay, in terms of acting as constraints, because the United States has been able to get favorable terms by sucking in money from all over the world. Okay. That's not going to be the case going forward. And now the president is like, well, I'm just going to fire Jerome Powell. He's obviously a felon because he mismanaged a real estate project, which, oh my God, I wish we'd have known that earlier. And, so now we're just going to artificially lower interest rates. Okay. He can lower the interest rates to zero. That doesn't mean anybody's going to buy our treasury bonds at the rates that he wants them to be purchased. Okay, because there's a market for treasury bonds. Now people are like, oh my God, everybody's going to dump our bonds, right? And I forgot, some Denmark, I think, sold 100 million, some firm in Denmark sold $100 million worth of bonds. And I said, look, that's not nothing. I said, but the total holdings of US treasury bonds are $12 trillion. Okay, so it's not enough to move the needle either. Okay. But what it means is that, yeah, our ability to finance things is going to change, okay? Because we're not going to be able to get money from the rest of the world as honest brokers. Because the one thing that we did really well, to explain to people, like in really base terms, how this worked, we did one thing in the international system super well. We took $1 and made it $12 in 3 years.
Right.
That's why everybody gave us their money. Okay. Wasn't because they liked us, wasn't because they were buds with us. It was because we were killer at securitization of risk and collateralization. That's basically what we do better than anybody else. You would think the man who is the Commerce Secretary of the United States might know that, but apparently not. Okay. With his little speech yesterday, I was literally like, I swear to God, I think I have brain damage after listening to that. Okay. And I'm an economist by training. So I'm like, that's not how it works at all. But anyway, that's what we did. Okay. We were really good at making other people money, including ourselves. That's gone now. Okay. And so countries are going to look at the United States and go, okay, I'll buy that bond, but I'll buy that bond for what you want plus 2% because you're a sociopath. Because here's the reality, there's no good cognate for other countries or other investors at that level to park their money. You can't put it in gold. The European Union doesn't have a vehicle that makes sense. I mean, there's just, you can't avoid the United States. Okay. To a certain extent, we're just on the rails.
Right.
So part of Carney's thing of, well, we got to figure out a new way to go. Well, good luck with that because you got to reconstruct reality. Okay. So people aren't going to do that. What they're going to do is be like, okay, look, I'll buy the 30-year or I'll buy the 10-year or whatever, but it's going to be risk plus 2 or 3, or they may not buy at all. Okay, so what does that mean for Americans then, right? You may be like, well, I don't care. I don't buy treasury bonds. What the hell do I care? Okay, well, here's what it's going to mean. Your money is going to be worth less. Your buying power is going to be worth less because the person who is going to buy most of that debt is going to be the U.S. government. So you accelerate financial repression. You accelerate debasement. You accelerate monetization of debts. Okay, which is going to further exacerbate the income inequality in the United States, which is going to further exacerbate home ownership problems in the United States. I mean, the president's like, well, let's have like 100-year mortgages. Okay, let's make it 10,000 years. Doesn't matter. You can't collateralize that debt and sell it at a level that's going to provide funds to the market. That's the fundamental problem with that. Okay, so all these things we're doing, we are fundamentally breaking the machine that has made America work since the end of the Second World War. That provided our real power, both economically and politically, and all that soft power that people want to talk about. It was the fact that we were predictable, sustainable, and profitable. We are no longer predictable. We seem to be completely out of control. So sustainability is in doubt. And we're not riskless anymore. We're not costless anymore.
Well, and also we, as you said before, we gave back enough so that people wanted to still
cooperate.
Right. So, USAID saved hundreds of millions of lives, and the soft power is money, really. Right.
Right. And we spent, even if I accept the number, which is not the number, I used to drive by USAID every day when I lived in DC. Even if I accept the insanity of whether, it's costing us $40 billion. So what? You know what costs a hell of a lot more? Fighting everywhere.
Uh-huh. And also having hundreds of millions of people extra debt.
Right. No, yeah. But putting aside the moral cost, if you just want to look at it in dollars and cents, I'm like, right. The cheaper route this is the thing I don't understand. And honestly, when I was a Republican, not until I started working internationally did I finally get it. Okay. We disproportionately benefit from a safe, stable, and predictable world environment. That's why it's in our interest to promote it. But I guess those days are over. So I don't know what to tell you as to what our model is now.
Right. But if you add in, so, I mean, that's just like the basic, I mean, in some ways that's the transactional nature of international relations, not the mob kind of transaction that
right.
Donald Trump likes to pursue. But also, there's people got more intelligence than they would have. They got to they got more money, but they also got the other things that made them safer or stronger or more healthy or whatever. And now, I mean, who the hell knows what anyone's gonna get from us? And I mean, Five Eyes is no longer.
I mean, everything. First, I slipped into this, and you're the historian, so you tell me, right? I'm the political scientist. I slipped into so it's pre-Barbara Tuchman Guns of August, right? That's the framework that he's kind of pining for, But I'm like, but this time there's a lot less incest and cousins. Okay, what does that look like? And I'm like, you know what? That may not actually be the system we're pining for. What we're going to wind up getting is a system where there's a lot of conflict at the top level and economically, possibly military, etc. And in the middle, right? Carney likes to talk about the middle countries. They're not going to act as a bloc. Okay, they're going to form their own coalitions. In other words, we're going to wind up with stratas of multipolarity, right? At the top, you might wind up with Russia, China, and the United States, largely because of nuclear arsenals. Okay. And then below that, you're going to wind up with the European Union, possibly, the BRIC countries, possibly you get a coalition in Australasia, right? And then below that, you have, the non-aligned, the African countries, etc. Right? So people got to ask themselves, okay, well, what happens in that environment? Everything costs more, number one, okay, because trust reduces risk, and reducing risk reduces cost. Right? So everything's going to cost more, and overall, the lives of everyone around the world goes downhill, because what made everything so much better was the free flow of people, money, and goods. Now, one of the things Carney said, or maybe it wasn't Carney, it was one of them, it was somebody, globalization's over. If you want to think about it in the jihad versus McWorld kind of Barber way, yeah, sure. That is this notion of there's West and then there's the rest, and this globalization of like Western values. Yeah, that's probably true. But instead, now we're going to have stratas of globalized shared truth, right? And those conceptions of the world are going to be in conflict.
It also seems to me that they're going to be fluid. From what Carney said is we'll partner with these people for some things and we'll partner with those people for other things. So not only do we have the risk cost analysis, we've got a shifting landscape of who's doing what to whom, with whom, how, at what cost, where's the, I think a lot about, and it's not because I actually have any experience, but information, intelligence sharing, like as just a basic, right? So the West has, NATO got together and said, we could share intelligence. And then there were the Five Eyes. Oh, okay, we could share even more intelligence. Mm-hmm. And that will help us all because it reduces our costs for understanding what's going on around the world so that we can do what we want at the lowest possible risk. And now, well, how's that going to work if Canada and Europe are partnering this time and Canada and China are there, we're kind of alone because nobody trusts us, because why would they? And
so that's what raises the risk then for strategic miscalculation. Right. Not to go deep into intelligence, but yeah, listeners need to understand that in part, the security of the United States and the Western Bloc, as we used to understand it, was largely predicated on a massive cooperative network of intelligence gathering. And I'm talking beyond what we would call NTM, national technical means, right? Like satellites, intercepts, and things like that. Okay.
People.
The context that gets provided to all of that signals and talent keyhole intelligence is humans. Okay. It's why the CIA is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful actor in the U.S. intelligence community. Okay. Because HCS, human intelligence, provides context to what we're understanding. Okay. And our ability to have gained that context was because we had an entire partnership of countries all over the world. Not all of them, by the way, are friends. Again, they benefited from coordination and cooperation with us, okay, because they didn't want actors operating in their states that were undesirable. So they wanted our help in dealing with them. So as a consequence, we received intelligence from rather unsavory partners at times that saved lives, okay? In an environment where there can't be trust, then there is no sharing of intelligence. And, I would really love, as somebody who used to be in policy and intelligence, I would love to get my hands on some of the assessments of our allies trying to understand us right now. I would like to see what they're writing. I would like to see what they're saying about us internally. I have a suspicion as to what those things say. Okay, just from if I were writing about us, as a
Please share
former
that with us.
intelligence guy. Um, sure, I think. Well, I think what you heard in Carney's speech is the distillation of what the European intelligence community as a whole has concluded, which is, so here's how I would characterize us before 2016. We're at times erratic, we're at times cacophonous, but we bounce up and down between a bound of behavior. Okay. And yes, at times we act in our own interests and don't really care too much about the rest of the world, but we bounce around inside a predicted bound. Okay. And if they're being honest with themselves, I would say this: starting with the global war on terrorism, the level of that stochastic bouncing up and down started moving outside of the trade boundaries more and more. Okay, so it didn't rupture in 2000, and 1 through 2008, but it started routinely breaking the assumptions of the model. It wasn't within bounds. It started breaking the assumptions of the model. And despite everybody's best hopes for Obama, it continued to break outside of those norms. Okay. And then Trump comes along and it's breaking outside of those norms even more. Okay, more often. Most of the time we're within the bounds, but we're breaking outside of the bounds more often. And then when Biden comes along, what I think everybody learns is that rupture might be structural and not situational. Okay, because Biden isn't able to fix the Iran deal. Biden isn't able to fix the rupture between the United States and its traditional allies. They just don't have any thirst for it. And honestly, they're like, dude, you may not even be here in 3 years. I mean, early on in his presidency, they were like, look, you may just be a placeholder. Okay, because you're making no structural changes to your underlying activities. Okay, yeah, we like you. We trust you, Joe. But the rest of your structure of your government and your body politic is pretty hostile to our interests, right? And then Trump comes back, and basically they're like, okay, now instead of operating outside the norm is the anomaly, operating within the norm is the anomaly. Okay. And so now they're like, okay, so the risk profile now is up here instead of being down here where it was. Okay. And so now we're bouncing up and down up here, whereas before we were bouncing up and down here. And so, Carney's like, well, look, up here is a way different cost profile than down here. And we have to stop pretending we're down here because we're up here. Okay.
Right.
And so my suspicion in those intelligence reports says things like, you need to take Trump at his word, not because he's some mastermind stratego, but because there don't appear to be any checks to stop him. Okay. I mean, let's be frank about this. Really bothers me as a person who worked at DOD for 5 years. You had admirals, generals, and senior field officers think it was okay to accept an order from the Secretary of Defense to either shoot the surrendering, shoot the wounded, or shoot people in hors de combat. Pick your poison as to what level of law you want to say applied in that circumstance. All of those three outcomes are a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This is all unlawful orders. And the Secretary of Defense has no authority to order pizza, let alone order people to be killed under Title 10, okay, and Goldwater Nichols. And yet our soldiers were like, yep, absolutely, shoot that motherfucker twice. Okay, well, now the U.S. military is a threat to the United States, which is something probably most people didn't think about. But when I saw that video, I was like, we must be out of our minds. We did what? Well, they might call somebody. How? The guy's floating on flotsam in the ocean. Right. You think he's got, and even if he could, did you see some sort of satellite phone before you shot him?
Well,
I mean, given the issues I worked on, which largely we were condemned for around the world, okay, GWAT, detention, all of that stuff. I'm like, wow, I couldn't imagine in our wildest dreams we'd have ever done anything like that. And we had way better justification and, quite frankly, political commitment in the United States to use force that way. and we didn't. Okay. We weren't indiscriminately carpet bombing people. We weren't indiscriminately using force in the GWAT. We just weren't. Okay. And if you'll remember early on, there was quite a bit of political consternation about how long it took for us to respond to 9/11 militarily. Okay. But I look at this and I'm like, okay, so we are not predictable. Our allies have no choice, or who are our allies, are the other countries in the international system, have to assume that there are no controls on the president's authority and power. Congress doesn't operate in a way that seems to check it, despite all of their noise. And the military doesn't seem to be willing to ignore any erratic order that doesn't comport with the strategic environment. So they're dealing with an erratic actor that has the most potent military force in the history of mankind, backed by nuclear weapons. That's a pretty potent problem to deal with.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem, but it's in its unpredictability. It's not all. I don't know how to say this. This is, like, it's unpredictable, so therefore it's higher risk, so therefore, but like the unpredictability itself, like who's going to be next, and are we going to
So
go?
if you're Greenland and you saw what happened with Maduro, should you take threats seriously or not? If you're Canada and you saw what happened with Maduro, should you take those threats seriously or not? Now, Canada and Greenland are materially different from Venezuela.
Right.
Okay. The United States controlled the tempo of the battle with Venezuela. The United States controls the tempo of escalation with Venezuela. The United States had military intelligence and all kinds of superiority with respect to Venezuela. Okay. Still didn't stop anybody in the U.S. military from saying, excuse me, what exactly is our legal authority to initiate military operations against this country? Because I don't remember an authorization for the use of military force. I don't remember a UN resolution. And the last time I checked, Venezuela hadn't attacked the United States. So I'm a little fuzzy about our authorities. So if I'm Greenland or if I'm Canada, I can't just ignore the threats that he's making as posturing.
I don't think he even knows like what he's planning on doing. I mean, so can you? I've been thinking a lot about the military and this the UCMJ and the idea that you are duty bound to the Constitution to not follow unlawful orders.
Yeah, I think it's Article 92, but yes.
Right. So do you have a sense? I mean, I bet your sense has changed since in the last couple of months about whether there are any guardrails in the military left, or have they all, resigned? Or
well, let me give you this. Okay, so when Trump was first elected, from my time in the Pentagon, I still have friends that are flag officers, those generals and admirals, okay, and people who are senior field grade officers. Okay, so these are majors, lieutenant colonels, captains, commanders, lieutenant commanders, things like that. Okay, so these are people who, for the most of their career, were commanders of significant forces, 1,000 men or more. Okay. And I asked him, what do you think is going to constrain? Because I didn't believe anything would constrain. That was back when he got elected.
Right. The first time, right?
And no, the second time. The first time I felt that honestly there was enough friction in the way in general throughout the White House and the Pentagon that if push came to shove, there probably would be people that said, I'm not executing that order, and not acknowledging relief of command. Okay. Right. And that their deputies wouldn't acknowledge the relief of command. Okay. I think that erosion started when Trump was elected the first time, and General Milley, and the protests that happened in DC in the wake of George Floyd. I was super pissed about that. I'm like, wow, General Milley's out walking with the president. This is completely a breach of decorum and completely off the hook. Now, I found out later the facts behind that, and then the facts became public, and I'm like, oh, okay. So, yes, he too recognized what a problem that was. Hooray for him. Okay. And he was tricked. Okay. Uh, but these flag officers and field of grade officers all said to me, well, I think that their families will essentially stop them, that they're going to think about their families, and they're going to think about whether or not they want their families subjected to this. And there are consequences to certain types of military action for their families. Okay. And that is going to act as a moderation. So no, they're not going to execute orders to use nuclear weapons, if the strategic environment doesn't make sense. And they're not going to use military force offensively. Okay. And then that video happened. And I just took the clip of that video where the guys are floating in the flotsam or whatever and get zapped for the second time, right? We've all seen the footage. And I said, so how do you like me now? And basically they all said, it's very difficult for us to maintain what we told you a year ago. and I'm like, right. Because here's the thing. We know now why Admiral Halsey resigned. Okay. So when he resigned, all right. So to back up. So Admiral Halsey was the combatant commander for Southcom. Okay. Which is essentially Central and South America, right? Mexico on down. Okay. And if you're in the military and you're an officer, okay, becoming a combatant commander is like winning the Super Bowl ring. That's as good as it gets. Okay. You've done everything, won every accolade. There's such a few number of people that are going to become combatant commanders ever. Great people. There are tons of great people who are never going to become combatant commanders. They're just going to be 4 stars or 3 stars or colonels or whatever. Okay. So such a small sliver makes it up there. So that when a guy like that says, I'm going to go spend more time with my family, 8 months in, okay, this is going to sound really, really piggish and as a dick. But here's the thing. That man for the last 35 years has told his family, go talk to the wall because I don't have time for you. That's how you get to that position, is you do make choices about what comes first. Okay. So that man decides 8 months in, I am throwing away the Super Bowl ring and I'm done. And so with colleagues, these officers, we were all like, what must have happened in that room was nothing short of a complete rupture of military decorum between the flag officers and the Department of Defense leadership. I'm like, they must have said, we want to firebomb Texas or something, was basically what we joked about. Well, now we know. Yeah, the guy heard the plan for we're going to attack Venezuela, and he was like, "There's no legal basis for that. It's not consistent with the strategic environment. It's going to create all kinds of problems for us." And I'm sure Hegseth was like, "Well, you either do it or get out. You either do push-ups and no fat chicks or get out." And this guy was like, "Okay, I don't have time for this shit," and just stood up and walked out of the meeting. Okay, right. So what's the U.S. military leadership look like now? All the people who have any kind of objection to make are walking because they're not going to put their families at risk. They're not going to put their pensions at risk. They're not going to, be Mark Kelly and try to fight it through lawsuits and everything else. That guy's already discharged and he's somewhat protected by the Senate. Okay, being a U.S. senator. So honestly, all of that controversy only helps him. That's not the case for most flag officers or senior military leaders. Okay, they're going to lose their entire life's work and their family's future by losing their pensions. So they're quitting. Okay, so who's left? The phony tough and the crazy brave. Yeah, and you know what? That's how you wind up getting people shot in the water, even though they're either surrendering in order to combat or they're wounded. Mm-hmm. So that's the circumstance we're facing right now.
So do you think so the way you framed it, the risk before was that they would do the right
today, I'm like, no, he's going to engage in some kind of push on Greenland. Okay, I'm not sure what form it's going to take. Because here's the thing, while we like to talk hyperbolically, France is not going to nuke the United States over Greenland. Britain is not going to nuke the United States over Greenland. It's unlikely we even go into war over Greenland if the United States acts militarily. Okay, even if we annihilate that roughly 100 troops that are on the island. Now, don't get me wrong, it's going to cause a massive rupture, and Europe is going to deny Americans entering the Eurozone entirely. There's going to be massive sanctions between the United States and Europe, and it's going to be the worst thing ever. Don't get me wrong that wouldn't happen. Okay, but I don't see the use of military force in the case of Greenland. It probably is true in the case of Canada. So there are restraints where people are going to look at this and go, now, let me just say this. I think all the generals on Greenland are going to be like, okay, yeah, there's a small risk. Things could spiral out of control, but it's not a non-zero risk. So we should really think this through here. Okay, whereas with Venezuela, there was a non-zero risk that things were going to spiral out of control. Right. We hit Iran. There's a non-zero risk that things are truly going to spiral out of control. We hit some, African country, there's a zero risk that things are gonna spiral out of control. We hit Greenland, or we use military force on Greenland or Canada. There's like a 10 or 20% chance things could spiral out of control. And these guys aren't going to be willing to play Russian roulette with one chamber full and 4 open. Okay, that's what I'm guessing. And so they're really going to push back hard. Okay, I believe that. But I'm like, we could, there was an idea I had this morning in response to a reader that, what if we just assert we own Greenland? I'm like, yeah, that's an idea. What if we just start acting as if and plus up our forces on that island and make it a de facto takeover and just start mining and just start doing stuff?
But that's kind of what we have the opportunity. That's what doesn't make sense to me, because Denmark has said, put as many people as you want there.
It's not about what happens. It's about the optics of coercion. That's right. We don't need to do any of this because Denmark has basically said, we're willing to do whatever you want to do, but you need to tell us what it is you want to do. And Trump's response is, I want you gone and I want the deed in monopoly. That's what I want. And the Danes are like, okay, we can't do that. First of all, we're not abandoning 60,000 of our own citizens. Okay. And secondly, they don't want to be part of you.
And
so is there anything else you want?
Vikings when they got Greenland, like they're going to just say, hey, take it.
Right. Exactly. Right. So it's like, well, we don't want that, and so it's not about what actually happens. It's about how it happens. So if the United States says, yes, congratulations, all you Greenland people, you're now Americans. You're like the Marianas, actually. You're going to be American nationals. You're not even going to be U.S. citizens. You're going to be American nationals, right?
Well, not that being U.S. citizen really matters that much anymore anyway, but I digress.
But they say, okay, you guys are all ours now, and they start putting troops on the street, and they start, policing, and they start running and administering the territory as if it was the United States, and they put a massive military fleet to intercept anybody who attempts to come to the island. I might do it. Okay, now is that going to cause a rupture in the halls of the Pentagon with the military? Tough. Flip a coin as to whether or not they go, yeah, we shouldn't go down this road, and we're willing to put our careers on the line to stop it. It's doubtful they will for that.
What do you think about Canada, though?
Well, it's funny. I started writing for a long memo in January, and like one of the fourth or fifth pieces I wrote was, if Trump wants to make history, yeah, attack Canada. It'll be the last thing we ever do. First of all, people fail to understand how big of a country Canada is. Okay, number one.
Right. Okay. They only have 11 million people.
Secondly, Canada is not Iraq. Okay, we're going to face troops that are well disciplined, well armed, well garrisoned, well supplied, have good intelligence, have solid. How do I know this? Because we trained them all.
Right.
Okay. We equipped them all. We wanted them to be our peers up until, we decided to become insane. We wanted a peer partner. Okay. So we did everything in our power to ensure that happened. Okay. Not to mention, they're going to give every person, and rightly so, they're going to give every person they possibly can in Canada a gun. Okay. And so you're going to have just massive resistance from the Canadian population. And Europe is not going to just stand on the sidelines.
Right.
During all of this, right? So I have a hard time believing that any general looks at Canada and says, hell yeah, that's a good idea. Now, here's the thing. I guarantee you we have a plan to attack Canada because we have a plan to do everything. Okay. If aliens land on the south lawn of the White House and attack people with sex toys, we got a plan for that. Okay.
Very deep somewhere in the Pentagon.
Yes.
There's a plan
yes.
for everything.
I only know this because I worked on operations plans. Okay. We got all kinds of plans because you got to think it through in advance, because when the crisis comes, there's no time for thinking. There's only time for doing. So we do all our thinking as much as possible as we can in advance. Okay.
Right. At the end, I want to digress to what the craziest plan that you ever worked on is, but I don't want to stop us just yet.
All right. I can't think of any plans that were crazy, and I can't talk about a lot of that work, but it seems crazy till it happens. Okay, because a lot of what I do at Borderless Living, and a lot of what I've started doing at the Long Memo, not to just plug my own stuff, but part of the issue in terms of like what I do and why people pay attention to me is I ask, okay, what if your assumptions melt? What happens then? Okay, right. If we take all these things that we think are tautological and we say, what if they're not? Okay, what happens? That's a lot of what operations planning is. Okay, up until Trump, we had no desire to attack Canada. But if Canada had been taken over or something, we needed a plan as to how to deal with that. Now, do we think that's likely? No. Okay, we have plans for Mexico. Same reason. We have plans for what happened, back in the day. The biggest thing we were worried about was the Soviets rolling tanks through the Fulda Gap, right? So we used to plan that all day long. Germans were going to do this. The French were going to do this. The Italians were going to do this. The British were going to do this. We were going to do that, right? We practiced it over and over and over and over, right? That coordination. That's what I do in my writing. I'm like, okay, well, what if these things don't function the way you think they do? What if your planning isn't as hardened as you think? What if your assumptions about what's going on aren't correct? Okay. And in the work that I do with clients, right, especially people who are thinking of living abroad or whatever, that's what I spend most of my time talking about, which is, okay, well, what if this part of your plan isn't as hardened as you think? Okay, that's what the military does. Okay, that's where I learned that. That's what the military does. And it's funny because initially, I think when you reached out to me, you wanted to talk about the national defense strategy.
Well, that's because that was the. I mean,
I said on Endra's
25 years ago.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like, and national defense strategy, wasn't that like 6 years ago? No, it was actually 3 months ago. But yeah, but the reason why I said that thing was so problematic is we're going to make decisions based on really flawed thinking. We're going to make plans based on really flawed thinking, and so that creates a national security gap. Okay.
Well, I mean, it would seem to me at this point, given the composition of the leadership of the regime, that there isn't so much unflawed thinking. I mean, nobody seems to have a clue really what they're doing, except for maybe Stephen Miller does because he's just evil. But
for me, it's funny. So for many of you, these people are all cartoon villains. For me, they're former colleagues. So I have a different context in which to understand their behavior. And I'm not saying that makes me better. I'm saying that makes me different. What we're seeing right now, and I call them the Trump junta, because that's how they operate. You see a collection of individuals basically indulging every fantasy they've ever had. with Vogt and Miller and the president and J.D. Vance and Hegseth and others. They have had these warped ass ideas. Especially, I mean, I knew Stephen Miller back when he had hair.
That's some questions I want to ask, but okay.
Well, he had hair, and all those people at Heritage, they used to be my colleagues. Now, a lot of them have left because they can't stand what's going on, and I appreciate that. But, these people have had these views for quite some time. Now, here's the thing. In the Republican Party, none of these views are new.
No.
I remember Pat Buchanan going on and on about, race issues and all. I mean, a lot of the stuff we hear now, we used to hear from Pat Buchanan back in the day during HW and W. But nobody said, hey, let's put Pat Buchanan in charge.
No, but I mean, that Heritage Foundation plan is a 50-year-old plan. I mean, they
Right.
have been executing little
Right.
by little over
Right.
long periods of time, which
Right.
the other side,
Yeah,
I mean,
Fulner,
hasn't.
Coors, Wayrich, etc. Right. Okay. And again, it's hard for me, having been in that lot, looking back, going, I must have been in some other room because I had no idea what was actually going on. I didn't see it. Okay. That said, I have this friend. He's got this great line. He goes, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. That's definitely the case with me. Endogeneity definitely was a problem. But this team's behavior is because there isn't one band leader. Susie Wiles is not, as far as I can see, coordinating positions the way like Andy Card did. Mm-hmm. It's like every idea that comes to mind, hell yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. And so one minute it's let's make a deal with Canada. The next minute it's let's nuke Canada. Next minute it's this, next minute it's that, and this whole, Trump always chickens out. Right, because he's not actually ideologically committed to anything. He's entirely transactional. And like a 5-year-old who keeps reaching for the cookie, he's going to keep doing it until he thinks he's able to get away with it. But that doesn't mean he's not going to strategically retreat. But there's no, people talk about, Project 2025 and everything. And I remember when it came out, I was trying to get people to pay attention to it. What ultimately got people to pay attention to it, particularly Democrats, was when I would say, they want to get rid of the National Weather Service. And people would go, the National Weather Service? How are we supposed to get weather? Well, we're supposed to get it from Fox News. And they'd go, but where does Fox News get their weather? Well, the National Weather Service. Now you see the circular logic of this problem here. Okay. Right. I'm like, these are not thought through principles. This is ideological nonsense. And I was one of the first people to say, look, this is Mein Kampf for the Republican Party. It's just a list of grievances and all kinds of punitive measures that have to be taken because of perceived grievances of what's happened to these people over their lives. Okay. And now we're paying the price.
I mean, their benefit is that they don't really want to make anything work. I mean, the whole point is to tear it down, not to make anything work. So.
Oh God, I can't think of his name at the moment. I took courses with him ages ago. He's over at Georgetown. He wrote God's Guns and Sedition. Oh, geez. I'm doing him an injustice not being able to think of his name at the moment. I can see his face too. He was a big wheel in the cracker factory in general on terrorism. Back in the days of Bush, and he's written seminal works on terrorism and how the West should deal with it. And then he wrote this book, God, Guns, and Sedition. And the first part of that book, he talks about the accelerationist, nihilistic view of rank and file Republicans. I'm sure you can look up. It's a great book, by the way. Bruce
Hoffman.
Bruce Hoffman. Yes, Dr. Hoffman. Yeah. Bruce Hoffman. God, Guns, and Sedition. And in the first part of that book, he talks about how essentially Republicans want to burn it all to the ground because they think ex nihilo they can make a better world.
Right. Because that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Because apparently we didn't disproportionately benefit from the status quo. Hence my confusion and my ultimate determination to leave the Republican Party around 2012. I'm like, I don't think we're on the same page anymore.
Right. Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking us through some of this stuff, kind of breaking it down to the really super transactional. Um, if there's anything you can share about a wild and crazy plan, love to hear it. But if not, I'll wait.
No,
Yeah.
our plans. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, people. I'll share this. Okay, I had this friend, close friend. Okay, he was a colonel, and he was a reservist, but he had done war crimes, at the Hague, for Kosovo and things like that. And he says to me, when I was out in the field, I would say to myself, I don't really know what's going on in the Pentagon, but surely they must have a plan. He goes, now that I've worked here, I don't care if my next deployment is to serve coffee in Geneva. I'm going to be scared out of my goddamn mind because we have no clue what's going on half the time in this building. Okay.
Yeah.
And honestly, my experience at the Pentagon looked more like The Office. Granted, it was all national security stuff. Then I remember they had that show, The E-Ring. And I remember too, they had, what did they call it? The Document of War, where they tried to explain the interagency coordination process. I was like, this is hysterically funny. I remember when those people were in the building too, interviewing us. And I was like, yeah, this place looks much more like Dunder Mifflin than, how you're portraying it. Okay. That said, at least when I worked there were a lot of people truly committed to the national security of the United States, regardless of their partisanship. Okay. I don't know how much that's the case now because I do know so many people have basically been shown the door despite their qualifications and despite their commitment to the people. And the biggest change that happened under Trump is it's not about the public good anymore. It's about what can I steal? What isn't nailed down? What can I grift? Okay. And Aaron Sorkin's portrayal in West Wing and whatnot, was aspirational, right? I think it was Jen Psaki said it was a love letter to public service or something like that, right? And yeah, but a lot of that was true though. The sentiment behind that was true. The long hours was true. The sacrifices, personally and professionally, that get made was true. And people did it because they felt it was important to engage in national service. I don't know how much of that is true now. I just don't. And on that cheery note, that's why people call me Mr. Happy Fun Guy. So,
Mr. Happy Fun Guy, let me give you a chance to tell people where to find you and read your stuff and support
right.
you.
So on Substack, if you want, it's thelongmemo.com. Okay. And you can read my stuff there. I typically now am publishing once a week for sure, but sometimes more given if the world explodes, which seems to be happening a lot lately. And then the other place is Borderless Living. I publish 3 times a week now there. We have a country report every week. We have a strategy piece on Tuesday, and we have a paid piece about what to do about it on Thursdays. We also hold a once a month Q&A where I do things like this with readers. And we also have strategy sessions, and I provide consulting to individuals that want to take it the next step and get serious about, okay, so how do I reduce my geopolitical risk? That's what I've started calling this, geopolitical risk. So borderlessliving.com, thelongmemo.com, and that's where you can go find me on Substack.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
It was great. I would like to remind all of you that if you, at the top of your screens, you should be able to just subscribe to both of us. I'm looking at the chat from, I don't know where, YouTube or something. They couldn't.
Any questions I'm happy to answer.
There really aren't. I just want to remind you guys to subscribe to both of us. And if you can afford paid subscriptions, those are really important as well. And that you'll be able to see this video very soon on Substack, and it'll also go up on audio in the next day or two. So thank you. And
Thank you.
Hopefully I'll get a chance to talk again.
Yes. Anytime. Happy to be here. Thanks. Have a great day.